The storm roared like 1,000 cannons, but it was her cry that stopped Captain Elias Ward's heart. Picture this: the Caribbean Sea, 1715, a night so black the stars drowned in it. Waves crashed over the deck of the Solitude, Elias's small sloop, salt water stinging his eyes, wind howling like a banshee through tattered sails. At 38, Elias was no stranger to tempests, but this one felt alive, vengeful, as if the sea itself wanted him dead. Alone for 8 years, haunted by a mutiny that stole his crew, his family, his everything, he'd chosen this life of solitude. No one to trust. No one to lose. Just him, the sea, and the ghosts he couldn't outrun. But tonight something changed. A sound cut through the storm's fury, a cry not human, not animal, but something otherworldly, sharp enough to pierce the gale. If you were Elias, would you risk your life for a sound you couldn't explain, or batten down and sail for safety? Tell me in the comments, because what Elias did next would bring 400 pirates to his ship with gold by dawn. The sloop pitched violently, timbers groaning like a dying beast. Elias gripped the helm, his scarred hands steady despite the chaos. 8 years ago he'd been Captain Ward, commander of a merchant fleet, respected, loved. Then came the mutiny, knives in the dark, his wife's scream, his son's lifeless eyes. He'd survived, but at what cost? Now the Solitude was his prison, his sanctuary, a battered vessel carrying a man who'd sworn never to care again. The cry came again, closer, a haunting melody that twisted his gut. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't his imagination. Something was out there, in the heart of the storm, calling to him. His lantern flickered, casting wild shadows across the deck, the light barely piercing the sheets of rain. He squinted into the darkness, heart pounding like a war drum. There, tangled in a mess of fishing nets, was a figure, shimmering, broken, alive. Her scales caught the lantern's glow, fading from emerald to ash gray. A siren. Not the myth sailors whispered about in taverns, but real, flesh and blood, or whatever sirens were made of. Her tail fin twitched weakly, caught in the nets, her arms bruised and bleeding from struggling against the ropes. Her eyes, deep as the abyss, locked onto Elias's, and in them he saw something that hit him like a cannonball: fear. Not the seductive lure of legend, but raw, desperate terror. Her lips parted, and that cry came again, softer now, a plea woven into a melody that made the storm seem quiet. "Help!" she whispered, her voice broken, accented, barely audible over the crashing waves. Elias froze. Every sailor's tale screamed the same warning. Sirens meant death, luring men to jagged rocks or watery graves. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to cut the nets and let the sea claim her. But those eyes, those weren't the eyes of a monster. They were the eyes of someone who knew what it was to be abandoned. If you're hooked already, smash that subscribe button, because this story's about to take you somewhere you'll never forget. Elias's mind raced. He thought of his wife, Mara, how she'd begged him to save their son during the mutiny, how he'd failed. He thought of the years spent running from that guilt, each wave a reminder of what he'd lost. Helping this creature could be his end. Pirates, navy, even the sea itself might come for him. But as the siren's head slumped, her strength fading, something in Elias cracked. He couldn't watch another soul die. Not tonight. Not again. He drew his knife, the blade glinting in the storm's lightning, and hacked at the nets. The ropes were thick, sodden, fighting him like a living thing, but he cut faster, harder, until they gave way. She collapsed onto the deck, her tail curling weakly, her breathing shallow as the tide. "Stay with me," Elias said, his voice rough from disuse. He dragged her to the shelter of the cabin, her scales scraping against the wood, leaving a trail of luminescent blood. Inside, the sloop rocked like a cradle in a hurricane, but the cabin was a small fortress against the storm. He laid her on his bunk, her body lighter than he expected, like a bird with broken wings. Her name, she whispered, was Kalira. Not just a siren, but a guardian, she said, her words halting as if English was a language she'd learned from shipwrecks. "Guard, what?" Elias asked, wrapping her wounds with torn sailcloth. Her eyes flickered, like moonlight on water. "Treasure, city, lost." Each word cost her, but they carried a weight that made Elias's skin prickle. A sunken city? A treasure? He'd heard the tales, sailors' dreams of gold beneath the waves, but this was no tavern story. This was real, and it was dangerous. The storm raged outside, waves hammering the hull like fists. Elias lit a second lantern, its glow revealing Kalira's face, beautiful, alien, with cheekbones sharp as coral and hair like seaweed woven with pearls. She tried to sit up, wincing, and pointed to the horizon beyond the cabin's tiny window. "They come. For me, tomorrow?" Her voice was a warning, a prophecy, and it sent ice through Elias's veins. Who were they? Pirates? Or kind? Something worse? He wanted to ask, but her eyes fluttered shut, her breathing slowing to a faint rhythm. He covered her with his only blanket, the one Mara had sewn years ago, its edges frayed from his endless handling. The storm's howl seemed to mock him, whispering that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, or the first step toward redemption. What would you do? Risk everything for a creature you've been taught to fear, or turn away and save yourself? Drop your choice in the comments, because Elias's decision is about to change everything. The storm didn't let up, but Elias's mind was a tempest of its own. He checked the sloop's rigging, securing what he could, but his eyes kept darting to Kalira. A siren. A guardian. A mystery that could sink him faster than any reef. As he stood at the helm, the rain soaking his weathered coat, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just opened a door to a world he couldn't close. The sea was vast, but it was no longer empty. Something was coming. Something big. And if you're as gripped by this as I am, click that like button and stick around because the next part will blow you away. Want a hint? Picture 400 ships on the horizon, their holds brimming with gold. Click the video on your screen for another tale of impossible odds, and let's see if Elias survives the dawn. The storm's fury faded to a restless murmur, but the real tempest was brewing inside Captain Elias Ward's cabin. Dawn broke over the Caribbean Sea, 1715, painting the horizon in shades of bruised purple and gold. The Solitude, Elias's battered sloop, bobbed like a cork on the now calm waves, its timbers creaking like an old man's bones. Inside, the siren Kalira lay on Elias's bunk, her iridescent scales catching the faint light filtering through the cabin's cracked window. Her wounds were bound, but her breathing was shallow, each gasp a reminder of how close she'd come to death. Elias, a man who'd sworn off trust after a mutiny stole his family 8 years ago, stood over her, his scarred hands clenched. He'd saved her, against every sailor's warning about sirens and their deadly songs. But now what? Her cryptic warning, "They come for me, tomorrow," hung in the air like cannon smoke. Who were they? And why did her eyes, deep as the ocean's heart, seem to see right through him? If you were Elias, would you trust a creature of legend or cast her back to the sea? Drop your answer in the comments, because Elias's choice is about to drag him into a storm far deadlier than last night's. Elias knelt beside the bunk, checking the sailcloth bandages he'd wrapped around Kalira's arms. Her scales, once vibrant, were dull, like a coral reef bleached by time. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open, and whispered, "You lost ones. I see them in your eyes." The words hit Elias like a rogue wave. How could she know about Mara, his wife, or little Thomas, his son, both lost to the mutineers' blades? "Don't play games with me," he growled, his voice rough as barnacles. "Why should I trust a creature who lures men to their deaths?" Kalira's lips curved, not in a siren's seductive smile, but in something softer, sadder. "Not all songs kill, Captain. Some save." Her voice was a melody even in its weakness, and it stirred something in Elias he'd buried deep, a flicker of hope or maybe just madness. She struggled to sit up, wincing as she pointed to the sea beyond the window. "I guard, city, sunken. Treasure, not gold but power. They want it. They come." The cabin felt smaller, the air thick with the scent of salt and blood. Elias's mind raced. A sunken city? Treasure with power? He'd heard sailors' tales in rum-soaked taverns, stories of Atlantis-like ruins beneath the Caribbean, guarded by creatures like Kalira. But those were myths, weren't they? Her eyes told a different story, one of duty and fear. "Who's they?" he pressed, leaning closer. Her answer was a whisper, "Men who steal what they cannot hold." Before he could demand more, a shadow crossed the window. A ship, bigger than the Solitude, its sails crisp and white, cut through the morning mist. A merchant vessel, its deck bristling with crew. Elias's stomach dropped. In 8 years of solitude he'd seen maybe 3 ships pass this stretch of sea. Now, with a siren aboard, one was too close for comfort. "Stay down," he hissed, grabbing his spyglass and climbing to the deck. The merchant ship, the Dawn's Mercy, flew a Dutch flag, but its crew moved with the nervous precision of men expecting trouble. Through the spyglass, Elias saw their captain, a stout man with a tricorn hat, pointing at the Solitude. Words drifted across the water, "Siren. Cursed. Check the hold." Elias's blood ran cold. Someone had seen Kalira, or maybe just the nets he'd cut, trailing luminescent blood in the water. The merchant captain raised a speaking trumpet. "Ahoy, sloop. You harbor anything unnatural?" We mean to board and see for ourselves. Elias gripped the helm, his knuckles white. The smart thing, the safe thing was to deny everything, maybe even hand Kalira over. But her words echoed in his head. Some songs save. He thought of Mara, how he'd failed to save her. Could he live with failing again? This is my ship, he shouted back. No borders, no trouble. Sail on. The merchant captain's face darkened and he muttered to his crew. They didn't fire, but they didn't leave either. Instead, they adjusted their sails, circling like sharks. If this tension's got you hooked, smash that like button and subscribe because this story's about to explode. Elias ducked back into the cabin, where Kalira was struggling to stand, her tail fin twitching against the bunk. They know, she said, her voice sharp with fear. Not them worse. Tomorrow. Her eyes darted to the horizon, where the sea lay deceptively calm, a mirror reflecting the rising sun. Elias wanted to shake her, demand answers, but her trembling hands stopped him. She was no monster, she was terrified. Tell me everything, he said, softer now. What's this treasure? Who's coming? Kalira's voice was a low chant, like waves lapping a forgotten shore. City, beneath. Crystal of tides. It balances sea, life. I guard it. Men, pirates, want it. Break it, control seas. And everything. Her words painted a picture of a glowing crystal, hidden in a coral city, its power tied to the ocean's heartbeat. Elias felt the weight of it, the impossibility. He was one man, one sloop, against a force that could reshape the world. The merchant ship was still circling, its crew shouting now, demanding Elias surrender the creature. He barred the cabin door, his heart hammering like a shipwright's mallet. Kalira grabbed his arm, her touch cold but strong. You chose me. Why? Her question cut deeper than any blade. Why had he saved her? Was it guilt for his past or something else? A need to prove he wasn't the coward he'd become? Because I couldn't watch you die, he admitted, the words torn from a place he'd locked away. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the cabin was silent except for the creak of the sloop and the distant shouts of the merchants. Then a new sound, a low hum, like a song building in Kalira's throat. It wasn't deadly, but it carried power, making the air shiver. She stopped herself, shaking her head. Not yet, too weak. Tomorrow, they come. The merchant ship finally turned away, its captain yelling a promise to return with others. Elias watched them go, dread settling in his gut like an anchor. Kalira's warning echoed, not them worse. The sea was calm now, but it felt like the calm before a hurricane. He looked at Kalira, her scales faintly glowing again, her eyes pleading for trust. He'd saved her, but at what cost? 400 pirates were coming, and they weren't bringing gold for nothing. What would you do? Trust the siren's cryptic warnings or prepare to fight for your life? Tell me in the comments because Elias's next move will decide everything. If you're loving this, click the video on your screen for another tale of impossible odds. It's even wilder than this one. Stick around because the horizon's about to light up with danger. Dawn broke over the Caribbean like a blade slicing through the mist, but it was the sight on the horizon that stopped Captain Elias Ward's breath. 400 pirate ships, yes 400, stretched across the sea like a forest of black masts, their tattered flags snapping in the wind, cannons gleaming like teeth in the morning light. The Solitude, Elias's lone sloop, bobbed helplessly in their shadow, a minnow surrounded by sharks. The air grew heavy with the smell of gunpowder, tar and salt, the kind of scent that promised blood before words. Inside the cabin, Kalira, the siren he'd pulled from the storm's jaws, gripped his arm, her scales flickering with a faint glow. Her warning from last night, they come, tomorrow, was no longer a mystery. They were here. But why gold? Why her? And why did Elias, a man who'd spent 8 years running from trust, feel like he'd just sailed into the fight of his life? If you were Elias, would you face 400 pirates or hand over the siren to save your skin? Drop your choice in the comments because what happens next will leave you speechless. Elias climbed to the deck, his boots slipping on the storm-soaked planks. The lead ship, a hulking galleon with Reaper's Tide carved into its bow, loomed closer, its figurehead a grinning skull wreathed in coral. A man stood at the helm, Captain Blackthorne, his name whispered in every port from Nassau to Tortuga. His weathered face, scarred like a map of battles won, was framed by a black tricorn hat, his eyes sharp as cutlasses. Behind him, his crew, 100 strong, watched in eerie silence, their hands resting on swords and pistols. Elias's heart hammered like a blacksmith's forge. He'd faced storms, mutinies, even death, but this? This was a navy of outlaws and the Solitude was a speck in their path. Ahoy, sloop. Blackthorn's voice boomed across the water, deep and commanding. You have something that belongs to the sea. Surrender her and we'll fill your hold with gold. Elias tightened his grip on the helm. Gold? For a siren? Something wasn't right. Kalira emerged from the cabin, her movements slow but steady, her tail fin trailing luminescent drops on the deck. Her eyes, deep as the ocean's trenches, locked onto Blackthorn, and Elias saw something unexpected: recognition. Not fear, not defiance, but a knowing that made his skin prickle. They revere me, she whispered, her voice a soft melody over the creaking ships. I am Sea's daughter. Before Elias could process her words, Blackthorn did something that turned every sailor's tail on its head. He dropped to one knee right there on his deck and bowed his head. His crew followed, a wave of reverence rippling through the 400 ships. The sight was surreal: hardened pirates, men who'd slit throats for a single doubloon, kneeling like pilgrims before a shrine. She's no prize, Blackthorn called, his voice softer now, almost awed. She's our protector. Her absence sank half our fleet. Return her, Captain, and we'll make you richer than a Spanish governor. If this twist has you hooked, smash that subscribe button because this story's about to dive deeper. Elias's mind reeled. Pirates didn't bow. They didn't offer gold as tribute. And they sure as hell didn't call a siren their protector. He glanced at Kalira, her scales catching the dawn's light like a shattered rainbow. Is this true? He asked, his voice low. She nodded, her eyes never leaving Blackthorn. My kind guard the sea's balance. Crystal of tides, in sunken city. They believe I keep their ships afloat. Her words carried a weight that sank into Elias's bones. These pirates weren't here to kill her, they worshipped her. But something in Blackthorn's crew didn't sit right. A few men, their faces shadowed under wide-brimmed hats, stood apart, their hands twitching near their blades. One, a wiry man with a serpent tattoo snaking up his neck, glared at Kalira with eyes that held no reverence, only greed. Elias knew that look. He'd seen it in the mutineers who'd taken his family. Trouble was brewing, and it wasn't just the tide. Speak plain, Blackthorn. Elias shouted, his voice cutting through the sea's murmur. What's the game? Gold for a siren or something else? Blackthorn rose, his smile tight, like a man caught between duty and doubt. No game, Captain. The sea's daughter belongs with us. Her songs keep the storms at bay, the reefs from tearing our hulls. Without her we're cursed. Name your price: gold, jewels, a share of our next take. The offer was tempting, a fortune that could buy Elias a new life, far from the ghosts of his past. But Kalira's hand tightened on his arm, her voice urgent. Some want the crystal. Not to honor, to control. Break it, rule the seas. Her words painted a chilling picture. A crystal with power over tides, storms, maybe life itself. Elias thought of Mara, how he'd failed to protect what mattered. Could he hand Kalira over to men who might twist her purpose into destruction? The serpent-tattooed man stepped forward, his voice a hiss. Enough talk, Blackthorn. Take the wench or sink the sloop. Murmurs spread through the crew, some nodding, others shifting uneasily. Blackthorn's jaw tightened, his authority fraying like a worn rope. Elias saw it then, a schism in the pirate ranks, just like the deputies turning on their marshal in those old frontier tales. He could use this, maybe survive it. But surrender Kalira? That meant betraying the flicker of trust growing between them, the first he'd felt since the mutiny. She stays with me, Elias declared, his voice steady despite the odds. You want her, you'll have to take her. The words hung in the air like gunpowder waiting for a spark. Blackthorn's eyes narrowed, calculating, but before he could respond, the serpent-tattooed man drew his pistol and fired. The shot grazed the solitude as mast, splintering wood like a warning from the gods. Kalira's breath caught, and then she sang. Not the deadly lullaby of legend, but a single, piercing note that froze every man in place. The sea itself seemed to pause, waves stilling, gulls falling silent. Her eyes glowed like moonlight on water, and for a moment, Elias felt the world hold its breath. The pirates stared, some in awe, others in fear, their weapons half raised. Blackthorn's hand shot up, silencing his crew, but the serpent-tattooed man's glare promised more violence. Kalira's song faded, her strength waning, and she slumped against Elias. They split, she whispered. Choose, now. Elias's heart pounded. 400 ships, a divided crew, a siren who could change everything. What would you do? Stand with Elias and a siren against impossible odds, or negotiate with pirates who might betray you? Tell me in the comments, because Elias's next move will decide if they live or die. If you're gripped by this showdown, click the video on your screen for a tale with an even wilder twist, and hit that like button to keep the adventure rolling. The Caribbean Sea erupted into chaos as Kalira's piercing note faded, but its echo lingered like a ghost in the air. The Solitude, Captain Elias Ward's lone sloop, rocked violently, surrounded by 400 pirate ships, their black flags snapping like vipers in the wind. Cannon fire roared, splitting the dawn as splinters flew like deadly rain across the deck. The Serpentitude pirates' warning shot had ignited a powder keg, and now rogue factions within Captain Blackthorn's crew turned on their own, blades flashing, muskets blazing. Elias shielded Kalira, the siren he'd saved from the storm, her scales glinting faintly under the smoke-choked sky. Her warning, "Some want the crystal, to control," burned in his mind. 8 years ago, a mutiny stole his family, leaving him a shell of a man. Now, with 400 pirates closing in and a traitor among them, Elias faced a choice: fight for a siren he barely trusted or lose the only spark of purpose he'd found since his world fell apart. If you were Elias, would you risk it all for her or sail for the horizon and never look back? Tell me in the comments, because this battle's about to change everything. The sea boiled with chaos, waves churning as ships collided, their hulls grinding like teeth. Blackthorn's galleon, Reaper's Tide, loomed over the Solitude, its cannons silent but its deck alive with fighting. The Serpentitude man, Varkes, Elias overheard, rallied a dozen rogues, their eyes gleaming with greed for the crystal of tides Kalira guarded. "Take the wench," Varkes bellowed, slashing through a loyal pirate's chest. "The crystal's ours." Blackthorn, his scarred face taut with fury, parried a blow from another traitor, shouting, "She's the sea's daughter. Betray her, you betray us all." Elias gripped his cutlass, its weight familiar yet heavy with memories of his own crew's betrayal. He wasn't a hero, not after failing Mara and Thomas, but Kalira's trembling hand on his arm stirred something fierce. "Sing again," he urged, dodging a pistol shot that splintered the helm. Her eyes, deep as the abyss, met his. "Too weak, but I try." Kalira's lips parted and a song rose, not the deadly lure of legend, but a melody that wove courage into the air. It was like sunlight breaking through a storm, each note vibrating through the sloop's timbers, stilling the waves for a heartbeat. Loyal pirates froze, their weapons lowered, awe washing over their faces. Even Blackthorn paused, his sword mid-swing. But Varkes and his rogues were unmoved, their greed a shield against her power. "Kill her," Varkes roared, leaping from Reaper's Tide onto a smaller brig, its cannons swiveling toward the Solitude. Elias acted on instinct, shoving Kalira behind the mast and diving for the sloop's lone cannon. He loaded it with trembling hands, the powder acrid in his nose, and fired. The shot tore through the brig's rigging, sending ropes and sails crashing like a felled tree. The rogues screamed, but more ships turned, their cannons flashing in the morning light. If this battle's got your heart racing, smash that like button and subscribe, because it's only getting wilder. Elias fought like a man possessed, his cutlass clashing against a rogue pirate who'd boarded the Solitude. The man's blade grazed Elias's shoulder, blood soaking his coat, but he drove his knee into the rogue's gut, sending him overboard. Kalira's song grew stronger, her voice weaving through the gunfire, and Elias saw its effect. Blackthorn's loyalists rallied, their movements synchronized as if her melody bound them together. But Varkes was relentless, climbing Reaper's Tide's mast, a stolen musket aimed at Kalira. "The crystal's mine," he screamed, his voice dripping with madness. Elias's blood ran cold. He knew that look, pure betrayal, like the mutineers who'd taken his family. "Not today," he growled, grabbing a grappling hook and hurling it at Varkes's perch. The hook caught, yanking the mast's rigging loose, and Varkes fell, his musket firing uselessly into the sky. Blackthorn seized the moment, his voice booming over the chaos. "To the sea's daughter." His loyal crew surged, cutting down rogues with brutal precision. But the battle wasn't won. 3 rogue ships broke formation, their cannons pounding the Solitude. The sloop's hull groaned, water seeping through splintered planks. Elias dragged Kalira to the cabin, her song faltering as she clutched her side, luminescent blood staining the floor. "You fight for me," she whispered, her eyes searching his. "Why?" The question hit like a cannonball. "Why?" Because her fear mirrored his own, because her trust was the first he'd felt since the mutiny, because he couldn't fail again. "Because you're worth it," he said, the words raw, final. Her lips curved and she sang again, a single shattering note that rippled across the sea. The rogue ship's timbers cracked, their hulls splitting as if the ocean itself turned against them. Men screamed, abandoning their cannons as the ships sank, swallowed by waves that moved like living things. The tide turned, but not without cost. The Solitude was taking water, its mast leaning dangerously. Blackthorn boarded, his sword bloodied but his eyes steady. "You've got courage, Captain," he said, offering a hand. "Join us. Protect her." Elias hesitated, glancing at Kalira, who nodded weakly. An alliance with pirates was madness, but so was fighting alone. He clasped Blackthorn's hand, sealing an uneasy truce. The remaining rogues surrendered, their ships scattered or sunk, but Elias felt the weight of Kalira's words. "The city, it calls." As the battle's smoke cleared, a massive wave rose on the horizon, not a storm but something alive, glowing faintly with bioluminescent light. The sunken city was waking. What lies beneath the sea, treasure, power, or doom? Tell me your theories in the comments, because Elias and Kalira are sailing straight for it. If you're loving this epic clash, click the video on your screen for another tale of betrayal and redemption. It's even more intense than this. Elias stood at the helm, blood and seawater dripping from his coat, Kalira leaning against him. The pirate fleet, now united under Blackthorn, formed a protective ring around the Solitude. Her song had saved them, but it had also revealed her power, and the crystals. Varkis's betrayal was a warning. Others would come for it. Elias's past, his failure to save Mara and Thomas, fueled his resolve. He wasn't that broken man anymore. He was a captain, a protector, and for the first time in years he wasn't alone. The wave grew closer, its crest shimmering like Kalira's scales. "Ready?" she asked, her voice a melody of hope and fear. Elias nodded, gripping the helm. "Ready." If this story's got you on the edge of your seat, hit subscribe and join the adventure, because the final chapter's about to unveil a secret that'll shake the seas. The Caribbean Sea shimmered under a midday sun, but it was the wave, massive, glowing, alive, that held Captain Elias Ward's breath captive. It rose like a mountain of glass, its crest sparkling with bioluminescent light, as if the ocean itself was unveiling a secret. The Solitude, battered but defiant, sailed at the heart of Captain Blackthorn's pirate fleet, 400 ships now united in reverence for Kalira, the siren Elias had saved from the storm. Her scales glowed faintly, her eyes fixed on the wave as she leaned against the sloop's helm, her voice a soft melody over the creaking timbers. "The city, it calls," she'd said after the battle, her song having turned the tide against the traitor Varkis and his rogues. Elias, a man who'd lost everything to a mutiny 8 years ago, stood taller now, his scarred hands steady. He'd fought for her, for trust, for a purpose he thought he'd buried with his wife Mara and son Thomas. But what lay beneath that wave? Treasure, power, or redemption? If you were Elias, would you sail into the unknown or turn back to the safety of the shore? Tell me in the comments, because this finale will leave you awestruck. The wave parted like a curtain, revealing a sight that burned itself into Elias's soul. A sunken city, its coral spires rising from the depths, glowing with bioluminescent light like a cathedral of the sea. Pearls studded the towers, their surfaces carved with runes that pulsed like heartbeats. Schools of fish darted through arches of living coral, and the water shimmered with colors no painter could capture. Kalira's breath caught, her tail fin twitching against the deck. "Home," she whispered, her voice a song of longing and relief. Blackthorn, standing on the Solitude's deck after their uneasy alliance, removed his tricorn hat, his scarred face softened by awe. "The sea's daughter returns," he murmured, his crew echoing the words across the fleet. Elias felt the weight of their gazes. Pirates who'd once offered gold now looked to him as a legend, a captain who defied 400 ships to protect their guardian. But the city's heart was calling, and Kalira's hand on his arm urged him forward. "Guide us," Elias said, his voice steady despite the impossible beauty before him. Kalira nodded, her eyes glowing like moonlight on water. She sang, a melody that wove through the fleet, calming the sea as the Solitude descended into the city's embrace. The water parted gently, a path forming through the depths as if the ocean itself bowed to her will. The sloop glided past spires wrapped in seaweed, their tips crowned with shells that hummed with ancient power. At the city's center stood a crystal, the crystal of tides, pulsing like a star fallen to the sea. It wasn't gold or jewels, it was life, the heartbeat of the ocean balancing tides, storms, and the creatures within. Kalira's song grew stronger, her scales blazing with color, and the crystal responded, its light flaring until the city shone like a beacon. Elias's chest tightened. This was what Varkis had wanted to break, to control the seas for his own greed. And this was what Kalira had guarded, even at the cost of her life. If this epic reveal has you hooked, smash that subscribe button and join our crew for more unforgettable tales. Kalira knelt before the crystal, her hands trembling as she touched its surface. The light enveloped her, healing her wounds, her scales now a radiant emerald. This keeps the sea alive, she said, her voice clear, no longer halting. Without it, storms rage, tides die, life fades. Elias saw it then, the weight of her duty, the same duty that had driven him to save her. He thought of Mara, how she'd believed in small acts of courage, how he'd failed her. But here now he hadn't failed. Blackthorn's crew watched in silence, their reverence a stark contrast to the battle's chaos. "You've done what no man could," Blackthorn said, his voice gruff but sincere. "You brought her home." Elias shook his head. "She brought herself. I just didn't let go." Kalira turned to Elias, her eyes searching his. "You could stay," she offered, her voice a melody that promised a life beyond the pain of his past. "Join my world. Guard this with me." The offer was a siren's call, not of death but of purpose, a chance to leave the ghosts of Mara and Thomas behind, to become part of something eternal. The city's light bathed him, warm, inviting, like a home he'd never known. But Elias looked at the solitude, its splintered deck, its frayed sails, the last piece of his old life. He thought of the horizon, the endless sea that had both broken and rebuilt him. "I'm a sailor," he said, his voice soft but firm. "My place is out there." Kalira smiled, not with sadness but understanding. She pressed a single scale into his hand, its surface glowing faintly, like a star caught in amber. "For storms," she whispered. "It will guide you." The fleet cheered as Kalira's song sealed the crystal's power, the city sinking back into the sea's embrace, hidden once more. Blackthorn clapped Elias's shoulder, his grin wide. "You're a legend now, Ward. Sail with us anytime." The pirates offered no gold, they didn't need to. Their respect was worth more. As the solitude rose to the surface, the sea calm and bright, Elias felt lighter, the weight of 8 years lifting. He wasn't the broken man who'd fled a mutiny. He was Captain Elias Ward, the man who'd bridged worlds, who'd learned that one act of kindness could ripple like a wave. What would you choose? Stay in a magical city or sail into the unknown? Drop your answer in the comments, because Elias's new journey is just beginning. The horizon stretched wide, calling him west. Elias set the helm, the scale in his pocket warm against his skin. Kalira's final song echoed in his heart, a promise of storms he could face, of a sea that was no longer empty. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and join our crew for more tales of courage and redemption. Click the video on your screen for another epic adventure. It's even wilder than this one. Tell me, what's the one act of kindness you'd risk everything for? Share it below and let's keep the sea's secrets alive.